Planning a post-pandemic getaway, the PM pledges to make COVID tests as affordable as possible. Travel companies fear the cost of keeping to new rules could force families to stay at home. But Mr Johnson's more optimistic.
We're going to see what we can do to make things as flexible and as affordable as possible. I do want to see international travel start up again.
Also tonight, the government urges us to trust the vaccine regulators amid more concerns about the side effects of the AstraZeneca jab. How a healthcare trust could have saved a young patient desperate for oxygen who called 999 from his hospital bed. And
last year, Captain Tom inspired us all
and filled the world with hope.
Channeling Captain Tom, how we could all do 100 good deeds to mark his birthday and raise money for charity.
You could build 100 sandcastles, you could jump 100 waves, you could make 100 cakes. And my father particularly loved the Victoria sponge cake, so maybe he would have liked 100 of those.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has pledged to make COVID rules for British holidaymakers as affordable as possible after a backlash from airlines. There are concerns that plans to test passengers before and after they travel abroad could price many families out of foreign holidays. The travel companies themselves say cheaper tests should be used for the safest countries. And currently holidaying abroad is, of course, illegal. The earliest that could change is May the 17th. Here's our consumer editor, Chris Choi.
Gatwick Airport today in what would be peak Easter travel season. Instead, the symbol of an industry on its knees. And for many customers now, another potential barrier to foreign trips, the cost of testing.
I'm not sure if I can afford such costs on top of everything else, on top of travelling and accommodation and so on.
Government plans a new green category of lower risk countries. There'll be no isolation or quarantine requirement on return, but COVID tests would still be needed pre-departure and after your return. If it is specified that those are PCR tests, currently the average cost is £120 each in the UK. But if cheaper lateral flow tests are allowed, the cost is far lower at around £60, and they're soon to be offered for free in England. Today came top-level acknowledgement that the cost of testing is now a key issue.
We're going to see what we can do to make things as flexible and as affordable as possible. I do want to see international travel start up again.
Now, there are various types of testing.
Despite those concerns over costs, this senior industry figure told me that the more expensive testing may be in place temporarily.
I do expect that if the government wants to be absolutely sure about the incoming control of variants of concern, that PCR testing will be there for a period of time.
With resorts barely ticking over, the holiday industry is lobbying for cheaper lateral flow tests for trips to lower risk countries. Couldn't your industry be doing more? For example, you could buy them in bulk and therefore make them cheaper.
I think we need to know more about the government's plans before we can make any speculation around what the industry might be able to do. Certainly the focus at the moment is emphasising the importance of making sure that the return to travel is as cost effective and as affordable for as many people as possible.
Within days, government is expected to confirm May the 17th as a target start date for international holidays, but much is still unknown about where we can go and how much it will cost.
Well, that's a big question, isn't it? I mean, we're all desperate to get on holiday abroad if we possibly can. The cost could be a problem with this, clearly. When are we going to know for sure?
Well, I think what is making this complicated is the tension that's creeping in. On the one side, you've got a lot of people who say, look, holidays are a privilege. They're not a necessity in this crisis. So we have to be extremely cautious, especially when it comes to this risk of importing COVID variants. On the other hand, you've got many people in the holiday industry who say, yeah, they want a safe route back to international travel, but they don't see why, for example, people that are going to low-risk countries should have to go through testing at all. And they make a very similar point when it comes to people who've had their vaccinations. Now, for anybody thinking of going abroad this summer, it's a very difficult time to make any concrete plans. We should know a lot more by next Monday at the latest, when a new government report will come out.
OK. Chris, thank you very much for that. And there is more on foreign holidays and how the traffic light system could work on our website. That's itv.com/news. Now, the government is also facing growing calls for rethink over plans to use vaccine passports for everyday life in Britain. They could be used to show whether or not someone has had a vaccine, recently recovered from COVID, I should say, or whether they've had a negative test result. It could be a lifeline for venues like theatres, but some fear it's unfair and will create a two-tier society. Well, that all came as the latest data showed 2,379 new UK infections, and that's a big fall during the past week. There were 20 further deaths, and that is a drop of 45% over the past 7 days. And 31.6 million people have now had their first vaccine dose, with the rate now slowing down a little. Here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinham.
Without COVID security, there is no audience. Without an audience, there is no theatre. So at Coventry's Albany Theatre, they are willing at least to consider so-called vaccine passports.
If COVID passports are either mandated or they are suggested in a way that is socially acceptable, and that does mean that people can come back to theatre, which is all everybody wants to do, then that could be the way forward.
The government is piloting some kind of certification that could prove you've been vaccinated, have had the disease, or have had a recent negative test. But it's not coming soon.
Next Monday, you'll be able to go to a beer garden in your favourite pub and have a pint, no need for certification. On the 17th of May, you'll be able to go in that pub, no need for certification. But when we do these pilots, if we think this could be part of a future that requires some of this to help us reopen the economy, then we'll absolutely bring those details back to Parliament.
Ministers also point out that passengers arriving in the UK already need to prove a negative test result, but say certificates won't be required for public transport and services or essential shops. The EU is already developing its own system called a digital green certificate, and in Israel there is already a digital green pass in operation. But here opposition to such schemes is hardening.
I think it is discriminatory to ask somebody to present a digital ID card, which is a vaccine passport, to get into H&M and Next in the high street or to get into a local pub.
And despite local pubs all having had a terrible 12 months, they are wary of COVID certification.
It would be so hard to police. And not only that, it would add extra expense to us that we really cannot afford, because this industry, it's on its knees.
But what if it meant that you could reopen without having to impose social distancing?
You would have to weigh up the extra staff you're putting on to police this against the taking away the social distancing to see if you make the money. Regardless of what's put in place, we won't come out winners.
The trouble for the government is that if it doesn't develop a COVID certification scheme, then unofficial ones may just emerge anyway. And I think that's what the concern is for government, those possible private unregulated schemes emerging, especially if there is, as scientists are now predicting, a possible third wave of the pandemic. So that's what's driving government thinking. But Labour is becoming increasingly important in this, because if they are opposed to COVID certification, it might not even make it through Parliament, because there are so many Conservatives who are dead against what they see as something as British as going to the pub being limited by something as un-British as having to show your papers.
OK, Carlton, and out Westminster, thank you. Well, Boris Johnson has urged people to get their vaccinations when they are invited, saying it is key to ending the pandemic. It came as fresh concerns about the safety of the AstraZeneca jab were raised in an Italian newspaper. And our science editor, Tom Clark, is here. Now, Tom, this has been rumbling on for a while, hasn't it?
And AstraZeneca.
With the AstraZeneca, and they're going to put their findings out tomorrow. And what can we expect?
Well, that's what we understand. I mean, back in the headlines again, I mean, this Italian official, senior in the European Medicines Regulator, said, in my opinion, we can now say that there is association with the vaccine and this rare blood clotting event. Now, EMA did not confirm that. Actually, the organisation he works with said they're still considering their evidence. They will make an announcement, we're expecting tomorrow. Similarly, from our regulator, we might expect an update. If you recall, there was some concern about a particular blood clotting syndrome in younger people, possibly associated with the AstraZeneca vaccine. We just didn't have enough data. It was certainly very, very, very rare. So, of course, the message remains, if you're someone of my age who's currently being called to have vaccines, it's absolutely a no-brainer to go forward and get it because the risk is very, very small. But we do have, since then, there have been more vaccines given, and of course more data has been emerging, so it's possible we're going to have an update on this. There certainly seems to have been some evidence there are an increasing number of these rare events as more of the vaccines being rolled out, so we could expect something in that area. But huge pressure on the vaccines regulators, the drug regulators today. Boris Johnson today saying we should trust our regulator, and I'm a sceptical sort of person who wouldn't necessarily assume something like that, but on this I do agree with him, because when you're making a decision about vaccine safety, something as important as this, you need to have seen all the evidence that's available, and that's what the regulators are having to consider, and then make that very difficult judgment about risk-benefit. The risk for someone of my age, obviously very, very low of the vaccine, but as you get younger and your risk of COVID go down, it's a different question, so we do need to see that evidence when it comes to help.
OK, Tom, thank you. Now, students at secondary schools in England will have to continue wearing face masks in class when they return after Easter. The Department of Education confirmed that today. It said it's looking at whether it can remove the advice for masks in classrooms and corridors after the next stage of lockdown easing, and that's no earlier than the 17th of May. And secondary schools in Scotland will reopen fully after the Easter holidays. First Minister Nicola Sturgeon said virtually all pupils could now return, but those who are shielding must still remain at home for another 3 weeks. We're moving on from COVID now. Detectives searching for the missing teenager Richard Akurogaye have found a body in Epping Forest in Essex. The 19-year-old university student disappeared after leaving his family home in London 2 weeks ago. And Sangeeta Lal is in Epping Forest for us tonight. Sangeeta, what are the police saying?
They say this is an extensive search, one that now involves police dogs, police horses and specialist teams. Now, officers have been searching woodland near this area for about 5 days when they discovered the body of a young man here yesterday. And since then, there has been a big police presence. 20 or so officers have been searching a lake nearby. They've actually cordoned off that area as they continue to investigate a short distance away. But they say they will remain here now for some time.
This is an extensive inquiry, and we are working tirelessly to establish the full circumstances. This includes forensic, medical and specialist inquiries, which all take time to complete.
Now, Richard was last seen at his home around 2 weeks ago, almost to the day. When he left, his parents became increasingly concerned, not least because he has sickle cell disease. So he was only really leaving his home during the pandemic to go to hospital appointments. When officers went to search for him, they saw he took a taxi from his home in West London to Loughton, nearby here. And then the following day, in the early hours of the morning, was seen on CCTV cameras walking to this forest. Now, no formal identification has been made, but specialist teams are supporting his family.
Sangeeta Lal in Epping Forest, thank you. Still to come in the ITV News, how new mental health hubs could help thousands of expectant mothers in England. And why Captain Tom's family want you to follow his remarkable fundraising feats. Those stories and more after the break. Join me then. Hello, welcome back. A patient who called 999 from his hospital bed after he was refused oxygen would not have died had staff recognised his symptoms. That was the damning conclusion of a coroner at the inquest into the death of 21-year-old Evan Smith. Evan had been suffering a sickle cell crisis, but it wasn't spotted by staff. Lucy Watson has more.
Evan Smith was a 21-year-old with a bright future ahead of him. A huge sports fan, a football analyst who loved his mum's baking. But today his mother and father were at the inquest into his untimely death to hear a coroner tell them that it could have been prevented.
We are beginning to get answers to what really happened, and it's sad to think that he didn't get the optimal care he needed. Nothing brings our son back.
Evan died at North Middlesex Hospital in April 2019 after developing sepsis. He suffered with sickle cell disease and even rang 999 from his hospital bed after nurses refused him oxygen. In court, that care was criticised.
The coroner concluded that a delay to Evan's blood transfusion was the cause of his death and that medical staff failed to identify the severity of his symptoms because of a lack of understanding about sickle cell disease. Had that procedure taken place sooner, then it is likely Evan Smith would not have died when he did.
In response, the hospital trust said, "We carried out a thorough internal investigation into Mr. Smith's care and treatment, and we recognise that this should have been better. Since then, we have made a range of improvements, including a specialist sickle cell area and extra training for staff. But that is little consolation for the loss of their only child."
I've been robbed of, everything I can say, because his absence and is so visible in the house.
I hope no other patient will have to go through that.
And they shouldn't. The life of this young, energetic man ended where he should have been looked after properly. Lucy Watson, ITV News.
Dedicated mental health centres for new, expectant and bereaved mothers are to open across England over the next 12 months. The hubs will bring together maternity care and psychological support. Charities have welcomed the news and they say it's never been more needed than now. Sally Biddulph reports.
Big brother Idris happily swings between mum and dad, while baby sister Envis is swaddled next to her mum, unaware of the challenges her mother faced before she was born. Lizzie suffered a miscarriage after her first baby, leaving her traumatised and anxious.
Everything started to panic me about having a miscarriage, especially after I hit 20 weeks. I then started, I knew that I was in the safe zone of my pregnancy, but I then started panicking about crashing my car or getting hit by something, or something stress would cause me to miscarry.
Lizzie sought specialist maternal therapy. It was difficult, but she says it made her more positive and calmer. Now that kind of care will be available to any woman who needs it.
Maternal mental health services is about perinatal trauma. So it could be miscarriage, it could be birth trauma, it could be having experienced a stillbirth, or having to terminate due to a fetal medicine problem.
In the 12 months to April last year, 30,000 pregnant women and new mums were seen by mental health community services. Now, 26 new maternal mental health hubs are being set up across England to bring maternity care, reproductive health and psychological therapy all under one roof. Around 6,000 women will receive treatment before and after birth.
I think it's a really positive move that it's happening now, and it really does sort of recognise that for women, particularly within that sort of 1,001 days after the birth of their baby, support is available for them.
There we go.
At just a month old, it's hoped when Envis has kids of her own, any stigma around maternal mental health will be history, with schemes like this paving the way for real change. Sally Biddulph, ITV News.
The actor Paul Ritter has died at the age of 54 of a brain tumour. He was best known for his role as the family patriarch Martin Goodman in the Channel 4 sitcom Friday Night Dinner.
When did our dad become cool?
What do you mean?
I'll have a beer. Yeah, all right.
So what do you think, lads? Good plan?
Yeah, it's a good plan. A very good plan.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And the TV star also had roles in Chernobyl, Harry Potter and ITV's Vera. His agent described him as fiercely intelligent, kind and very funny. And finally tonight, why the family of Captain Sir Tom Moore is asking more of us to follow in his inspirational footsteps. They're challenging us to raise money for good causes to coincide with what would have been his 101st birthday. And they got some celebrity support. Captain Tom's daughter told Martha Fairley all about it.
Last year, Captain Tom inspired us all
and filled the world with hope.
In his 100th year, Captain Tom's 100 laps of the garden raised almost £39 million for charity. Now, a year to the day since he started his walk, his family are challenging celebrities and the public to keep up his good work.
Create your challenge around the number 100, anything. So you could build 100 sandcastles, you could jump 100 waves, you could make 100 cakes. And my father particularly loved the Victoria sponge cake, so maybe he would have liked 100 of those. You can do 100 miles, 100 kilometres, 100 steps, 100 absolutely anythings.
Happy birthday to you.
After sharing his 100th birthday with the nation, Captain Sir Tom had, until his death in February, been planning how to include everyone in his 101st celebrations as well.
The number 100 meant so much to him. He absolutely loved that 100th year. Look at what happened. Who could not have loved it? We and he wanted this to be something, a celebration that would allow anybody from anywhere to do anything centred around the number 100.
And they hope his legacy will be a weekend of fundraising challenges at the end of April.
We're really just hoping that everyone sees this as something really fun to do. But if it culminates in something sensational on his birthday, well, it would make all our dreams come true.
Captain Tom's family will be continuing his walk as part of their 100 challenge, and they hope many more of us will be inspired to follow in his footsteps. Martha Fairley, ITV News, Bedfordshire.
And that is all for now. Tom Bradby's here at 10 from me and all the team. Stay safe, stay well. Bye-bye.